Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Health Mastery Show. This is episode number 23 with Dr. Jose Antonio. Jose is the CEO and co-founder of the International Society of Sports Nutrition, the ISSN, and an associate professor and director of the Exercise and Sports Science program at Nova Southeastern University in South Florida. You may have learned of some of Jose's work before, indirectly. Maybe you didn't know about it, but some of the things like Jeff Nippard puts out and others that make YouTube content, other informational content on Instagram, etc., they often cite Jose's work and kind of explain and break it down a little bit more. So Jose is a primary researcher. He's in the lab doing the experiments to get these results that we've learned about. So today's topic is all about protein. I really enjoyed this conversation. I love talking to Jose. And before we get into the show, I want to talk about my new website, healthmastery.co. There you can learn about my coaching services, also read some of the blogs that I've written, which I'll also be using to update and add more blogs in the future. And finally, I want to talk about my 10-day natural bodybuilding prep fast track. It's a 10-day free course that I'll be delivering live to people who want to learn about natural bodybuilding competition prep. I'll be going over the things that I've learned from competing since 2013 all the way up to my last shows in 2019. So you can find the link to that and some more information about that in the description in this episode. And if you have any questions, as usual, please do reach out to myself. But without further ado, let's get into this podcast with Jose Antonio. So Jose, thanks so much for coming on today.
Hey, you're welcome. I look forward to this, and I guess you're on the other side of the pond, I guess, as they say.
Yeah, Dublin, Ireland. I believe you're in Florida, right?
Yeah, wow, I've been to Dublin a couple times. Yeah, I'm in South Florida near Miami, so things are, it's always summer here, so I've been outside all day, pretty much.
Yeah, I live right in the city centre or about a kilometre away, 20 minutes walking, and I'm looking out the window here, and it's just grey, overcast, pretty cold, like you need a jacket, and that's pretty normal over here though.
Yeah, well, when I went there, it was in the summer, and it was the coldest summer I've ever experienced.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. But again, thanks so much for coming on. I've been a big fan of your work, especially looking into some of your research in the past, and I know it's been cited by many of the people that have been on here, and a lot of people that I respect, and a lot of people that listeners of the show would have known that have cited your work. So if for those who don't know who you are, would you mind giving a little bit of background into what you do, what you've done, and all about yourself?
Yeah, sure, not a problem at all. First, thanks for having me on the podcast. I actually got my PhD in the field of skeletal muscle physiology. My interest originally stemmed from skeletal muscle hypertrophy. I did initially some animal work looking at what regulated muscle hypertrophy and muscle fiber hyperplasia. After I finished my PhD, I did a postdoc in metabolism, looking at how the androgen receptor was regulated by androgens, by testosterone. And then after that, I've actually spent really most of my career in the sports nutrition field, looking at protein, creatine, you name it. I've looked at a lot of the more popular supplements, and now I am doing a little bit more, not just sports nutrition, but sports neuroscience, looking at the connection between exercise and brain function. And I do that mostly. I do my research at a university in South Florida called Nova Southeastern University. It's in Davie, Florida. It's a beautiful campus. And also I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. And if you want to come to a beautiful beach, Adam, I would highly recommend you come to our conference. It's September 10th to 12th. It is on Daytona. It is in Daytona Beach, Florida, one of the world's most famous beaches. It's a beautiful venue, and you'll learn all the latest in sports nutrition, sports science, and we even dabble a bit in strength and conditioning. There are speakers who are professional strength and conditioning coaches for, either collegiate teams or professional sports teams.
Nice. It sounds like you're really living the life. You're living
yes.
Nice weather. You've got your own company that you co-founded, and you're researching what you love. That's pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, and I live a charmed life.
So thanks so much for giving us some insight into that. So today we wanted to particularly talk about protein. So a couple different questions around protein and some practical application about that. So like I mentioned to you off air, most of the people listening to this podcast are interested in building as much muscle as possible, trying to lose as much fat as possible, just to be as big and lean as jacked as possible. So first question that I have for you is, would you mind give us some insight into what's the importance of muscle protein synthesis, muscle protein breakdown in the context of building muscle or hypertrophy? And do we want to minimize breakdown, or is some breakdown important? And do we just want to maximize muscle protein synthesis all of the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think sort of backtrack looking at those studies. So there are now, we've got numerous studies looking at the acute MPS or muscle protein synthetic rate post workout as well as post workout, plus the addition of essential amino acids or whole protein. And in general, there seems to be sort of this dose ceiling effect where anything beyond 40 grams at a single sitting, you get barely an increase, an additional increase in muscle protein synthesis. Now, in general, I think that's interesting because it provides a mechanistic explanation of why protein is important. But I also want to mention that the limitations to looking at acute data would be something like, and I'm going to give a baseball analogy. I don't know if you're a baseball fan, but some people who are, they might understand this. There are 9 innings in baseball, and if you watch the first inning and or second inning of baseball, watch the pitcher, you're like, wow, pitcher's throwing great, throwing strikes, guys are striking out. Predicting what happens in a baseball game based on the first inning is like what I see with these acute MPS data, or muscle protein synthetic data. At the end of the day, it tells you, I call it, it gives you a snapshot, it gives you a picture. But we don't need a picture, we need a movie. And so what's the movie? The movie is looking at 4, 8, 12 weeks of training plus supplementation, or 6 months, which would be horribly difficult to do. So it doesn't answer specifically your question, although I think mechanistically you focus on muscle protein synthesis, not necessarily inhibiting breakdown, because you want to have that turnover. You got to replace old proteins with new proteins, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there are severe limitations with just focusing on this acute data where you're literally measuring things for hours, and then people are trying to make these predictions about what will happen 4, 8, 12 weeks later or half a year later, and you just can't do that. It doesn't make sense. What happens is, at the end of the day, you have to do what I call time course studies, meaning you got to get trained guys or girls, feed them protein, and monitor them over weeks and weeks and weeks and see what happens. And this is where I think the acute data is interesting, but again, it doesn't tell you, it gives you barely a picture. It's a snapshot. And that's why I think this emphasis on MPS, muscle protein synthesis, seems really odd because, like I said before, it's like focusing on the first inning of a baseball game. It tells you a little bit, but it doesn't really tell you that much.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I haven't ever designed or done a study, but I know that one of the limitations is, especially with people who are, say, more advanced with lifting or whatever, they're lifting a while and have built an appreciable amount of muscle, is that over 4 weeks or even over 8 weeks, you're not going to necessarily be able to see huge differences between groups. It might be a year before you actually start to see a decent amount of muscle.
Exactly. And in fact, because I've done a lot of these high protein diet studies with what are basically trained mostly male bodybuilders, recreational bodybuilders. And you and I know it is ungodly hard to put on, a kilo of muscle mass. It's just hard, So these guys, they work they work their butts off in the gym, and they eat not only just a lot of calories, but they consume a lot of protein. And even with that, it's still difficult unless these guys go on the juice. And if you're on the juice, then clearly you're going to put on lean mass much more easily. But yeah, it is just insanely difficult. And you know what? In a way, it makes sense. From an evolutionary perspective, it doesn't make sense that the human body wants to put on a ton of muscle, that easily, because you'd have to carry that. Imagine this, back in caveman days, all of a sudden humans should just put on muscle. You'd have to carry that muscle, and it wouldn't necessarily provide a survival advantage when, at the end of the day, humans are endurance animals, and for humans to kill an animal to eat it, it's got to out-endurance it, because humans can't outrun it, they can't outspeed it, they can't out-muscle it. They got to out-endurance it. So from an evolution standpoint, it makes sense that it's crazy difficult to gain lean mass.
Yeah, so if we're not focusing, or we shouldn't be focusing on MPS, because I know that a lot of the research would compare, and I think that the research that you're mentioning there with the 40 grams of protein that maximizes muscle protein synthesis, I think it compared 20 grams, if I'm not wrong.
Correct.
So if we don't focus on that, or if we're not trying to say maximize that to say potentially maximize hypertrophy at a meal setting, or whatever we can control ourselves, what should we be focusing on? Or is it still something that we should focus on, but it's just not necessarily the ultimate way to track progress?
Yeah, I think most bodybuilders have it right where they focus on, if the goal is just to gain, wait, let me backtrack later. So gaining muscle mass is difficult if you're naturals. So in a sense, you have to gain some fat mass if you're going to gain muscle mass. Unless you're genetically blessed, there's a few guys who just gain muscle mass, but they're sort of the rare exception. So in that case, there's two things that are most important: total energy intake and total protein intake. And typically, if protein intake is high, energy intake is also high. So the number one factor would be sort of the combination of energy/protein intake. So that's number one. Now, obviously, you don't eat all that protein in one sitting. So the number two factor would be the timing or distribution of it. So if you spread that out every 3 or 4 hours, get a meal in, that seems to be one of the strategies that would work best for promoting muscle hypertrophy. And again, we're assuming training is on, is sort of dialed in. So that to me is the most important thing. So focus on total amount, and then focus on timing and distribution. And I think, and this sort of segues, and I don't know if you wanted to talk about this, but it segues into the, some people talk about the anabolic window. It's really an anabolic barn door, whatever the hell they want to call it. When in fact, it's a bit of a straw man. And I see this all the time. Like, some scientists will say, well, the anabolic window really doesn't exist. So after you work out, it's not critical that you consume any protein post training. And that's a completely wrong way of looking at it. If the goal is total protein intake per day, why would you wait hours after training to eat? You don't. I mean, if total still matters, get something post-workout, particularly post-workout, because you're probably slightly dehydrated and hungry. It's a great easy time to get, let's say, a 40-gram bolus of protein, and a high-quality protein, maybe a milk-based protein. And then, eat your normal meal 2 or 3 hours later. But the idea that, you work out, sit around for a couple hours, you're fine. Not if your goal is bodybuilding. And certainly, your audience is all bodybuilders, but even for high-end performance athletes, to sit around for 3 hours before you eat, or 2 hours, makes no sense. You got to get something in to help your body recover.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think I read a quote from Brad Schoenfeld a while ago. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was something along the lines of, it's pretty easy or simple to build muscle, but if you want to maximize your genetic potential, that gets pretty difficult and nuanced, and you need to be very specific. It wasn't those exact words, but that was along the lines of it. So when you mentioned that the secondary thing behind total protein intake would be distribution, is the reason that distribution is somewhat important, or secondary total intake, because we have an anabolic ceiling at a single sitting. So, and most people don't do this, but some people probably do. We eat all your food in one meal. Why would splitting it out to 4 different protein feedings in a day be superior, or ever so slightly superior than just eating all your protein in one single meal? Is there an anabolic ceiling to a specific sitting of protein?
Yeah, there seems to be a refractory period, after you consume have a protein containing meal. And it seems that you need that window of about 3 to 4 hours before you get a next meal. Now the interesting thing is, I don't think anyone's attempted to do the study. Let's say the traditional bodybuilder, I know in the United States, a lot of them will eat like 6 meals a day. So that would be breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then 3 what I would call meals, although some would just call it they're having a shake, which technically is still a meal. So they're consuming protein 6 times over the course of a day. Now, what would happen if these bodybuilders just split that up into a gigantic breakfast, a gigantic dinner, and then maybe 1 shake post-training? Would there be a difference? And I've thought about this, and that's a study that'd be infinitely too hard to do, so it's not something I will attempt. But I wonder if there would really be that big a difference, because to me, the driving force for hypertrophy is still mostly training and then nutrition. And the reason I say that is one of the initial high protein diet studies we did was we had guys consume 4.4 grams per kilo over an 8-week period. And they didn't change their training. These were trained guys and girls. So we told them, don't change your training. The goal is just eat a lot of protein for 8 weeks. That's it. And we found nothing happened, which is kind of interesting. I'm like, wow, you could eat all that protein, nothing happens. And, a lot of them complained about being hot and sweaty all the time, which makes sense. You get the protein sweats because of the thermic effect of it. So we decided in the follow-up study, which you're probably familiar with, is we dropped the protein intake to about 3.4 grams per kilo. Again, 8 weeks, but they all followed a sort of a traditional split routine body part training, traditional bodybuilding training. And in that case, at that intake, which is still high, 3.4 grams per kilo, they were able to elevate lean body mass. So what that told me is that protein itself isn't the driver. It's important, but at the end of the day, exercise is the driver, specifically heavy resistance training. So in a way, there's sort of like two wheels of a bicycle. Unless you're good at a unicycle, you need both wheels of a bicycle. Front wheel's nutrition, the back wheel is training, and that training ultimately drives the process. It's sort of like, are you better off getting a nutritionist or a bodybuilding coach? And I always say, well, first start with the bodybuilding coach, learn how to train, and then start with the nutritionist, because, it's, to me, the training part is what drives the nutrition part.
Yeah. So for those who don't understand exactly what you're saying, both training and actual protein intake stimulate protein synthesis, right? But obviously they're not, I don't know. I don't understand the exact mechanisms, but obviously they don't stimulate in the same way, because if there's no training stimulus, you're not going to get bigger. And I assume if there's, I don't know if it's even possible to not eat any protein whatsoever, and I don't understand why anybody would try and research this, but if you trained but didn't eat any protein, would you still actually build some muscle? I'd assume perhaps you might. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I think if you the first scenario where just eating protein doesn't do anything, because we know that. The second scenario is if you work out really hard and let's say eat a crappy diet. Let's say you sometimes forget to eat, sometimes you go to McDonald, sometimes you eat chicken, sometimes you eat vegetables. You'll still grow. You'll still grow. Yep. You may not grow as well, but you will still grow. So that alone tells you it's heavy resistance training that drives all of this for the most part. It's not the diet. Now, obviously, at high level bodybuilding, diet's critically important. I don't want people to think, oh, Antonio doesn't think diet's important. No, diet's very important. It's critically important, but training is more important. If you don't train, then all of this kind of is pointless, right? And in fact, one of the criticisms of my studies was, well, these people are consuming, high levels of protein, and sure, it's safe for a year, maybe it's even safe for 2 years, but, is it safe for 5, 10, or 20 years? And my answer to that is the only people who consume this amount of protein are, one, usually bodybuilders. Bodybuilders tend to be lean, tend to be healthy. If they're not on drugs, then certainly they're drug-free, and they tend to be among the healthiest populations. Yeah. So it's not like, the sedentary mom from Walmart is eating 4.4 grams per kilo. Nobody does unless you train. So in a way, high protein intakes, these people self-select that. Healthy people who train hard self-select it. So it's what, I always found that argument weird. It's like, well, what if they do it for 5 years? Well, yeah, but these guys are training like crazy. These are not unhealthy people. So it was just really odd.
It's pretty funny the way people do that, just regardless of this specific thing or even outside of it. If they find that somebody's doing something potentially that may not be proven to be safe, and I'm not saying it's not safe, but they'll say, like, that's not safe long term, but yet they're doing other things in their life that are, potentially add up, and you got to think about the context of your overall lifestyle rather than just, oh, you eat a packet of Jelly Babies or something, or a Snickers bar once a day. That's not good for you. You got to think about the context.
Right.
And it's really interesting what we talked about with the training, how that is more important per se than actual protein for stimulus, because I've got a lot of friends who are into, like, biohacking or whatever they're trying to, I don't really like that term, but they're trying to like do more with less, or produce like the Pareto's principle, like Tim Ferriss kind of style, and where you're just trying to minimize everything in every area of life to get the maximum output. And often with training, they don't have scientific principles or understanding necessarily, but they're trying to always come up with these ideas to do as minimum or as little as possible, and still get the same results. But if you're trying to always minimize it, then like you mentioned, that training stimulus is going to be the number one driver of hypertrophy. And obviously there's a ceiling, more not equal better, but there's going to be a certain amount, and you probably have to be above that threshold in order to keep that progressing forward.
It's funny you mentioned the word biohacking, and that word annoys the hell out of me. I don't know why, but this idea that there are things you can do that are, in a way, it sounds secretive. It's like, well, doing the minimal amount to get, I guess, the best result, when in fact, if you look at high-end athletes, and if you want to throw physique athletes in there in terms of how they train, nobody does the minimum. I mean, who the hell does the minimum? I mean, lazy people do the minimum. Whether you're bodybuilding or training for a sport. So this idea that there's sort of this minimalistic look at what you can do to, maximize whatever goal you have just seems really weird to me. It's just bizarre. But yeah, this biohacking thing, I've asked, when I ask people how they define biohacking, everyone defines it differently. How do you define it, or how is it defined to you?
I don't know. That's a good thing. But when you mentioned neuroscience in the first few sentences to me, that you're looking at that, I immediately thought of Bradley Cooper and Limitless, because I actually, I was in college, when I was in my first year of college, when I was maybe 19 or 18, I actually tried to like blend these nootropic supplements together. I don't know if you're familiar with nootropics, smart drugs, basically cognitive enhancers that are.
We're talking about drugs, not supplements, right? We're talking about drugs.
Well, they're like over-the-counter synthetic. They're great, like if they're food supplements or not, because they're synthetic and they're not from plants. Like they're called racetams and things like that, paracetam. Right. So they're sold by Onnit and some of them, kind of Joe Rogan's company. But I thought I was trying to develop this like limitless thing to biohack your brain to study or whatever. But I from some friends who work in neuroscience and flow and research like that, and they use that term a lot. It seems pretty trendy in the States, not so much in Europe, but especially West Coast America. Everybody out there wants to biohack, whatever that means. But
I guess it means whatever you want it to mean. When people ask, they're like, "What's biohacking?" Well, I'm making myself better. Okay, isn't that called exercise? Isn't exercise biohacking?
Yeah, that's true. You're hacking your biology, whatever that means. It sounds like you get attacking yourself with an axe or something. But to come back to the protein topic, with regards to leucine, then what's the importance of leucine within the context of protein, and then so the amino acid L-leucine, and then how does that relate to quality of protein? So I know that veganism and vegetarianism is on the rise, the popularity for multiple reasons. And but what's the importance of having sufficient amount of leucine in your diet at a specific sitting as well of protein feeding, and in the context, like I said, of the overall diet?
Right. I think, well, what's interesting is there's this idea of a threshold. I'm not a fan of threshold ideas, but there seems to be one that's taken hold that at each meal you have to hit a certain amount of leucine. It's an essential amino acid, 2 or 3 grams of it at a meal to elevate muscle protein synthesis to a significant extent. And I've always wondered about that, in the sense that if you are if you eat discrete meals, if you eat breakfast, lunch, dinner with a protein shake in between, you're going to hit that threshold if you just eat a mixed meal. What would happen if you got the same person and just had them graze all day? So they eat a little bit here, it'll eat a little bit there. Let's say they're eating 16, I'll call them feedings because maybe they're not meals. If they had 16 meals or feedings a day, but the same calories, same protein, but they didn't hit that 2 to 3 gram threshold of leucine, would it really be different? And again, that kind of study is infinitely hard to do. But there's a part of me that doesn't think so, because at the end of the day, it's still total calories and total protein. So does it matter? I mean, I don't know. I mean, leucine critically is the primary driver. It's the primary essential amino acid That's important. And that's why animal-based proteins are, quote, better than non-animal-based because of the higher leucine content. And I've never understood why companies that sell, vegetarian or vegan-based proteins like soy or rice protein or pea protein, just add leucine. I mean, if it's just leucine, just add more leucine. I mean, and then I don't know if that'll affect the flavor profile. My guess is it does, and it makes it more expensive. But that basically makes it on par with the animal-based proteins, particularly the milk-based proteins. So, I mean, is it important? Yeah, I think in any pragmatic sense, no one's going to eat 16 meals a day. We're probably going to eat at least somewhere between 3 and 6 meals a day. And within that context, that leucine threshold is probably important. But I just wonder about, those people who are just complete grazers, they just eat a little bit all day.
Yeah, so I think maybe to explain to people who don't or don't understand why leucine is important, this is what I kind of have compared it to. So leucine will be almost like the ignition to start muscle building, and then you have all the other essential amino acids that are there, and without sufficient amount of leucine, you're not going to maximize muscle protein synthesis, or you're not going to maximize muscle building. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And in fact, there's interesting data that if you were to do gram for gram the essential amino acids, which of course leucine is part of, and compare it to whole protein like whey or casein, that the essential amino acids are much better at driving muscle protein synthesis than whole protein. Of course, the trade-off there is that EAAs, or essential amino acids, they tend to taste awful, and they tend to be more expensive than just buying a jug of milk or a tub of whey protein. But gram for gram, it is in a sense better. I mean, there's interesting data. There's a scientist out of the University of Arkansas Medical Center, Arnie Ferrando, who's done some interesting work in that area. So, but again, it's better just to do whole protein because it tastes a lot better.
Yeah, I think one of the people I looked up to when I first got into bodybuilding, which was over 10 years ago now, was Lane Norton. I think I might have been 17 or something like that. And that's when I first heard of this term leucine. And his idea was that you want to eat multiple sittings per day. You got this, like you mentioned, that you're not really a fan of, but this leucine threshold of 2 to 3 grams of leucine, where you maximize hypertrophy in that meal. You have this refractory period where you kind of need to almost let your muscle protein synthesis curve come back down to baseline, and then you spike it again. And in between those meals, you can actually spike it very fast and then make it come back down by having Leucine or BCAAs just by itself. And I actually didn't have a job, and I used to spend like 80 euros a month on BCAAs, and I didn't have a job. But yeah, that's priorities. But yeah, so obviously things have changed then. But what are your kind of initial thoughts, or some of the research showing that perhaps that's not really the best way to go about things, even if you're looking to optimize it? Because obviously I was trying to biohack it there.
Wait, are you talking about the leucine threshold or branch chains? I'm not.
So the reason I was taking the branch chains was to get that leucine, with the idea of you need to have this threshold of 3 grams, and then you want to have this refractory period. But during that period, you actually can consume branch chain amino acids or leucine to spike it again.
Yeah, I don't think the utilization of branch chain amino acids for this purpose, it's not something I'd recommend. In fact, for the use of branch chain amino acids, the only utility that I've seen for it is actually with endurance athletes, and that's for minimizing delayed onset muscle soreness. And why would they take it? Well, let's say during a 4-hour bike ride, you're not going to be drinking milk or drinking whey protein, so it's easy to consume branch chain amino acids because it's just easier. It's much lighter. For your purposes, I mean, for bodybuilding, it's really, the branch chains I don't think are critically important, because if you're consuming whole protein, you're getting plenty of leucine, valine, and isoleucine. Now, would it hurt? I always take a pragmatic approach. Is it going to hurt? No. Could it help? Yeah. If money's not an issue, I always tell people, if money's not an issue, I say do everything. I mean, just do everything, But if money's an issue, and I know bodybuilders spend a ton on food, then it might be an issue. I think you're better off if you don't have unlimited funds, then stick to whole food proteins and some milk-based protein, and no need to do the single amino acids or branch chain amino acids.
But based on what you're saying, if you actually do have a vegan protein, or you're a follow a vegetarian diet, or have a meal, you could actually maximize that by having some BCAAs or
Yes.
amino acids with that meal. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Final question for you. I know that you've done some research on like super high protein intakes, or like
Yes.
more than what conventionally was, the 1 gram or per pound, or 2.2 grams per kilograms. What was some of the research you've seen, and how much protein you're actually doing per pound or per gram of body weight, and what kind of results did you see?
Yeah, in general, I think there's I'll use the word threshold. People love this word. There seems to be a threshold in terms of total daily intake that you need to promote lean body mass. And I think it's somewhere between 2.2 grams per kilo and 3.4 grams per kilo, because that is the range I've seen in studies I've done. Anything above 3.4 grams per kilo, probably it's not going to help. However, if you go high protein intake, it might promote the loss of fat mass. So, and for bodybuilding, obviously there's two things you want to do: lose fat, gain muscle, lose fat, gain muscle. So in that case, it is important. Now, we've had the luck of following. We followed 5 pretty high level bodybuilders for 2 years, and what's interesting, because these guys come to the lab all the time. What's interesting is, let's take the health part. Nothing happens. There's no change in liver function, kidney function, you name it. These guys, I mean, they're super healthy, super lean, clean as a whistle. However, when it comes to just gaining lean mass, what I've noticed with these guys is their lean body mass or muscle mass really just sort of goes up and down depending on how they're training, because they're always eating a lot. They never not eat a lot. It's how they train. I mean, because a lot of these guys, they sort of get sick of doing super heavy weights or high volume training or whatnot. They'll take like a few weeks off, maybe just do cardio or whatever, and then they'll get back in the gym, and they cycle their training such that it's almost like they train to be strong, and by training to be strong, the secondary effect is they also gain mass. Now, I know there's data to show that, if you do reps to failure, 30 reps to failure versus whatever, 5 to 10 reps to failure, sort of low rep versus high rep, that you'll gain, muscle hypertrophy is equivalent. Well, this is what I say to that is, okay, so you go to the gym. Why would you choose a rep range that takes 3 times longer to get the same effect with hypertrophy, but also you don't even get as strong? So who does that? Who makes that decision? Well, you know what? I'm going to do a lot of reps. My muscles will grow, but I won't get as strong. Versus the guy who does fewer reps, he still grows the same amount, but he gets stronger. It's always been odd to me that anyone would pick a high rep range because it just takes longer. Why would you do that? But I guess unless you're bored, you're tired of the 5 to 15 rep range. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I've just sort of been rambling on and on about that.
Yeah. I remember reading that in the research where you do really high protein, it did increase muscle mass more, but they actually had better body composition. They lost more fat mass, and you touched on that. Is there any practical applications to actually doing that? And what were do you remember the amounts of protein that they were consuming?
Yeah, I would based on the data we've collected, I'd say a good goal would be 3 grams per kilo, which is, you got to work at that amount. It doesn't come easy. So 3 grams per kilo, that seems to be sort of a nice, well, it's actually a lot, but it's enough that it might also help body composition in terms of lowering body fat mass. So, there are 2 things going on. You're more apt to gain lean mass. Obviously, training has to change. And you're also more apt to lose fat mass.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And would that be in the context of a surplus or a deficit, or would you recommend the same for both?
All of these studies, they were in a caloric either in balance, or they were in the surplus. None of these guys were in a deficit. So either caloric balance or a surplus.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I just did some quick maths that works out at around 1.36 or 1.4 grams per pound, which is probably in the high end, but definitely achievable if you're a bodybuilder. So thanks so much, Jose, for coming on.
Sure.
Where can people find more information about what you're doing, and what are you currently doing at the moment? Is there anything particularly interesting that you're working on?
Yes.
You mentioned something about neuroscience and sport.
Yeah, what I'd like to tell your audience is I'm helping organize 2 conferences. There's the ISSN, International Society Sports Nutrition Conference. It's in Daytona Beach, Florida. That's September 10th to the 12th. And then the Society for Neurosports. This is the sports neuroscience organization I co-founded. That is also in Deerfield Beach, Florida. We like Florida. People love the beach. That is November 13 and 14. So if you guys love the beach, hey, come to one of these conferences because the venue is beautiful. I mean, you get to look at the ocean. You get to swim in the ocean. The water here is actually quite nice. It's not cold at all. You could actually jump in it and not freeze to death. So unlike the west coast of the United States where water in California is crazy cold. It's like, who the hell swims in this stuff? So come to that. The website for ISSN is issn.net. And the website for the Neurosports Conference is neurosports.net. So issn.net, neurosports.net.
Awesome. That sounds awesome. And you're really tempting me to get away from this crappy weather.
Hey, I'm telling you, you get a good tan. Yeah. Hey, you got to get your vitamin D. Come on, vitamin.
I'm pale skin. I can step outside and, inside lights will give me enough vitamin D.
Oh my God.
All right. Thanks so much for going on.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it. You have a great night.
All right. So I hope you enjoyed that show. And if you want to find more about Jose, just check the show notes out. You can find all his social media links and his website and links to the conference that he talked about if you can make it out to sunny Florida. You can also reach me. You can also find my social media links and contact me if you have any questions regarding this. And finally, again, I want to mention that 10-day natural bodybuilding fast track. If you want to join that, click the link. It's in the description, and I look forward to chatting to you in the next episode.